The United States Africa Leaders Summit 2022 is an international summit held in Washington, D.C. from December 13th to 15th, 2022. Leaders from 49 African states and various African Union representatives attended the three-day summit, which is hosted by United States President Joe Biden. The summit primarily focused on health, climate change, food security, cooperation in space, and security of the continent. The summit is the second edition of the event after the inaugural event was hosted in 2014. The United States aimed to resume diplomatic relations with African states after a gap during the tenure of President Donald Trump. On Wednesday 14, 2022, the President of USA, Joe Biden, during the summit in Washington, D.C., he announced new investments in Africa focusing on boosting trade and infrastructures as his administration seeks to counter inroads that China and Russia have made it in the continent.
The United States is all in on Africa's future, because when Africa succeeds, the United States succeeds. Quite frankly, the whole world succeeds as well.
The new investments include a memorandum of understanding for new trade opportunities between USA and Africa, investments in infrastructures such as aid to build and maintain roads to encourage trade within the continent. Biden announced billions of dollars in new trade investments and an effort to help expand internet access to the continent, which the president said was necessary to boosting economic growth.
Congress, the U.S. will commit $55 billion to Africa over the course of the next 3 years across a wide range of sectors to tackle the core challenges of our time. These commitments build on the United States' long-standing leadership and partnership in development, economic growth, health, and security in Africa.
China has worked to grow trade relations with African nations and has developed major infrastructure projects, and Russia has expanded its military influence through mercenaries like the Wagner Group. The U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, during the summit session, said that employing mercenaries across the continent has defined stabilization between China and Russia as well.
Regarding Russia and China, the PRC, we're witnessing the PRC expand its footprint on the continent on a daily basis. And as they do that, they're also expanding their economic influence. The troubling piece there is that they're not always transparent in terms of what they're doing, and that creates problems that will be eventually destabilizing if they're not already.
The summit is part of a renewed push to boost ties as China gains influence with trade, investment, and lending drives. It's not the first time for African leaders to have such a summit. President Barack Obama held his own U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit in 2014, complete with gala dinner under a tent on the White House South Lawn. He promised then to take action to help build more prosperity and security in Africa. But his predecessor, Donald Trump, largely ignored Africa, never visiting the continent and even rudely discouraging certain African nations in a 2018 meeting as shithole countries. In previewing this week's U.S. summit, American officials have been careful to avoid framing Africa as a pawn in a larger geographical strategy. Instead, they sought to emphasize Biden's interest in cultivating ties that would benefit both the U.S. and Africa, and finding ways to harness the continent's potential. AGNES Nabugwa, Live at 8.